Chapter 1. A Name in the Snow. There are promises a man makes with his whole heart, and promises made for him before he has any notion of what a heart may cost. When Adrian Ashvale, Earl of Ravensford, stepped down from his carriage at the posting inn on the North Road, he told himself he was only tired, only cold, only impatient to reach his estate before night fell completely and the weather turned from threat to certainty. The sky had been grey for hours, the sort of grey that pressed the world downward, muffling sound and sense together. Snow had begun as a polite dusting, white flecks drifting like feathers, and then, with the swift temper of winter, it thickened into a determined fall. Mercer, his valet, protested the moment Adrian's boots met slush. "My lord, you'll freeze before you reach the door. We ought to remain in the carriage until the hostler—" Adrian cut him off with a small gesture. "The horses need rest, and so do we. I'll not have them driven to lather merely because I am in a hurry." Mercer's mouth tightened in that way it did when duty obeyed reason but disliked it. "As you wish." Inside, the inn smelled of damp wool, smoke and ale. A few travellers sat close to the hearth, their coats steaming faintly. A pair of farmers argued quietly about hay prices. A gentleman with ink-stained fingers stared at a ledger as if it had personally offended him. The innkeeper bobbed into a bow that was too deep and too familiar all at once. "Lord Ravensford, we weren't expecting. It's an honour. Shall I have your private parlour readied?" Adrian gave his name so rarely on the road that it felt almost indecent to hear it spoken by strangers with such relish. He nodded, distracted, and handed over his gloves. "Food," he said. "Something hot, and rooms for my party. We'll be off again within the hour if the weather allows." The innkeeper scurried away. Mercer began his quiet arrangements. Adrian moved toward the hearth, simply because the heat promised relief, and then stopped, as if the air had turned solid in front of him. A young woman stood a little apart from the fire, as though she had taken care not to claim a place that belonged to someone else. Her cloak was plain brown wool, damp at the hem. Her bonnet hid much of her hair, but a few strands escaped in soft curls at her temples. She held a small satchel close, both hands wrapped around it, and there was a kind of steady patience in the set of her mouth. Not pretty in the manner the ton applauded, Adrian thought. Not the sort of dazzling face that caused men to stumble and women to envy. Yet something about her, her quiet composure, her eyes lifted calmly to meet the world, made him look twice. She seemed younger than he was by several years, though not a girl. Her gaze flicked briefly toward him, then away again, as if she had observed him without presumption. But he saw the faint tightening of her shoulders, the instinct of someone accustomed to being judged. A gust rattled the windows. The door opened, and a blast of snow blew in. "Help! Someone! Please!" A boy burst into the room, no more than 12, his cheeks red with cold and panic. He stumbled, nearly falling. "My sister, she slipped by the yard. She's down, and she won't wake." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The innkeeper froze mid-step, face blank with alarm. The farmers rose slowly as if their bodies did not quite believe the urgency. Adrian was already crossing the floor. "Where?" he demanded. The boy pointed wildly. "Behind the stables. She went to fetch water and—" Adrian did not wait. He pushed out into the storm, the cold striking his face like a slap. Behind him came hurried footsteps, Mercer cursing under his breath, and then lighter steps as well. He turned and saw the young woman in the brown cloak had followed. "My lord," Mercer gasped, "you mustn't." "Later," Adrian snapped, and plunged toward the yard. Snow churned underfoot. The wind drove it sideways, blinding. The stable lantern cast a weak circle of light through the swirling white. "There!" the boy cried. A figure lay near the pump, half covered in snow, a small bundle of skirts and limbs. She could have been 14. Her bonnet had fallen off, hair plastered to her forehead. One arm was twisted at an odd angle, and her face, Adrian's stomach clenched, was too still. He dropped to his knees, brushing snow away. "She's breathing," the young woman said immediately, voice steady, and knelt opposite him. She touched the girl's wrist with sure fingers. Faint, but present. Adrian looked at her, startled by her certainty. "You know?" "I have had cause to learn," she replied simply. The boy hovered, sobbing. "Lydia! Lydia!" Adrian shrugged off his greatcoat. The young woman did the same with her cloak, and together they wrapped the girl in both, layering warmth as best they could. "Lift her carefully," Adrian said. Mercer appeared at his shoulder, pale with fear for him. He reached to assist, and between the three of them they got the girl upright, though her head lolled helplessly. "Inside," the young woman ordered, not to Adrian exactly, but to the world, as if the world ought to obey. "Near the fire, but not too close at first. We must warm her slowly." Adrian's arms ached as he carried Lydia through the door, snow melting down his collar. The inn's warmth felt almost cruel in contrast. The innkeeper rushed forward. "Put her in the kitchen, near the stove." "No," said the young woman, and the innkeeper stopped as if struck. "Too sudden. Here, by the hearth. Blankets, hot water bottles if you have them, and send for a surgeon, though I hope we shall not need one." Her authority was quiet, unshowy, but it held. Adrian laid the girl down carefully. The boy clung to her hand, crying. "Mercer," Adrian said. "Coin, whatever it takes. The surgeon now." Mercer hurried away. The young woman unfastened Lydia's wet outer garments with swift, modest efficiency. She did not seem embarrassed by the room full of staring travellers. She simply turned her body to shield the girl's modesty, and her hands moved with practical care. Adrian watched, something unfamiliar tightening in his throat. Compassion, certainly. But there was something else too, an unspoken resilience, a gentleness that did not weaken into fussing. "What is your name?" he asked, before he could stop himself. The young woman paused only a moment. "Hannah Brooke." Brooke. The syllable struck him oddly, like a bell heard in the distance. He frowned, trying to place it. There were 1,000 names in the world. Why should one trouble him? "And you are travelling alone, Miss Brooke?" he asked. Her eyes met his, clear and calm. Not by choice. But yes. The innkeeper returned with blankets. Hannah instructed him where to place them. She guided the boy to sit, to breathe. She spoke softly to Lydia's face, encouraging, as if the girl might hear her through the ice of unconsciousness. Minutes passed. The storm battered the windows. The travellers pretended not to stare, and failed. Then Lydia's eyelids fluttered. A choked sob escaped the boy. "Lydia!" The girl's lips moved, a faint sound. Hannah leaned close. "Easy," Hannah murmured. "You are safe." Lydia blinked slowly, confusion giving way to recognition. Her eyes filled. "I fell," she whispered. "I know," Hannah said, "and you will be well." The surgeon arrived at last, breathless and annoyed at the weather. He examined Lydia, declared her chilled but not gravely injured, and ordered warm broth and rest. Relief loosened the room. The farmers returned to their seats. The innkeeper sighed dramatically, as if he had personally survived an apocalypse. Adrian stood, suddenly aware that his shirt clung damply beneath his coat, and that he had forgotten entirely his own comfort. Hannah Brooke rose too, smoothing her skirt with a small motion that was neither flirtation nor humility, simply habit. The boy approached her, eyes red. "Miss Brooke, thank you." Hannah touched his shoulder. "Stay near her. Speak softly. She will be frightened when she wakes fully." He nodded, solemn, and hurried back. Adrian watched the exchange, and the strange feeling tightened again. "You did not hesitate. he said quietly to Hannah. She glanced at him, surprised by the observation. Neither did you, my lord. He almost smiled. I had the advantage of a title. People expect courage from it. Her mouth curved faintly, not unkind. Courage does not belong to rank. Only opportunity does. He studied her, as if seeing her properly for the first time. Before he could reply, Mercer appeared, looking as if he might scold Adrian and faint in the same breath. My lord, your private parlour is prepared, and your coat is soaked through. You must— Adrian held up a hand. His gaze remained on Hannah. Miss Brooke, where are you bound? She hesitated. To the village of Greythorn. I am to take a position there, as companion to an elderly lady. Greythorn, that was uncomfortably close to Ravensford's lands. And you, she added politely. Home, Adrian replied. To Ravensford. Hannah's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She recovered at once, lowering her gaze. How fortunate, she said, though the words sounded less like delight than dread. A gust howled at the windows, as if to underscore her feeling. The innkeeper approached, wringing his hands. My lord, the drifts are already deep. I cannot recommend anyone travel until morning. Adrian glanced toward the window, watching the white blur beyond the glass. He exhaled slowly, accepting what he could not command. Very well, he said. We stay. That night, in the private parlour, Mercer laid out dry clothes and complained under his breath. Adrian sat by the fire, staring into the flames, and could not seem to dismiss the name Hannah Brooke. He summoned the memory of his father's study, dark wood, leather-bound volumes, the faint scent of ink and smoke. He remembered an argument once, sharp and bitter, between his father and his uncle about debts, about honour, about the Brooke matter. At the time, Adrian had been too young to care. Later, his father had died, and so many unfinished things had been buried with him. Adrian rose abruptly. Mercer, he said. My lord? Tomorrow, when we reach Ravensford, I want the old correspondence trunks opened, the ones from my father's time. Mercer blinked. The trunks, my lord. They have not been touched in years. I know. Mercer hesitated, then bowed. As you wish. Adrian sat again, his pulse oddly quick. Somewhere in this storm, in this chance meeting, a forgotten thread had tugged at him, quietly, insistently. And he had the unsettling feeling that if he followed it, it would bind him to something he had never chosen, and might not be able to escape. Chapter 2. The Woman Society Deems Unsuitable. Morning arrived pale and brittle, the storm spent at last. Snow lay in clean drifts, smoothing the harshness of the road into deceptive peace. By noon, Adrian's carriage rolled into the familiar approach to Ravensford House, the great stone facade rising from winter trees like a solemn guardian. Smoke lifted from chimneys. Servants moved like dark figures against the white. Adrian should have felt relief. Instead, his thoughts kept straying, unbidden, toward the inn and the young woman with steady eyes. Lady Cressida Ashvale swept down the stairs like a ship under full sail. She was his late father's sister, widowed, sharp-eyed, and determined that her nephew's earldom should not drift into chaos through neglect. Adrian, she declared, kissing the air near his cheek, you look half frozen. I told you to travel earlier, before winter. I travelled when I could, Adrian replied, accepting her brisk affection. How is the house? Standing, Lady Cressida said, as if that were a triumph. Though I cannot say the same for your tenants' accounts. The steward brings me headaches daily. And you, she continued, stepping back to look at him as if he were a purchase she might return, are long overdue in London. People have begun to invent stories. I prefer the country, Adrian said mildly. Lady Cressida sniffed. A preference is not a duty. You are an earl. You must marry. Adrian removed his gloves with deliberate care. I have been home for 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes you have failed to become a husband. Tragic. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. There is someone here. Adrian frowned. A guest? Of a sort. Her mouth tightened. Mrs. Finch requested assistance. Charity, of course. A woman in reduced circumstances, respectable enough. I permitted her to bring the young lady to the dower cottage temporarily. Adrian's mind sharpened. What young lady? Lady Cressida waved a hand, impatient. Some companion, Miss Hannah Brooke. The name landed like a stone in his chest. He kept his expression steady with effort. Hannah Brooke is here? Yes, Lady Cressida said, and her tone implied that the universe had committed a slight. I do not know why. Mrs. Finch insists she is worthy. She is quiet, helps with her niece, some sickly child. But she is inconvenient. Inconvenient, Adrian repeated. Lady Cressida examined him sharply. You did not look surprised. Adrian's throat felt dry. I met her on the road. Lady Cressida's brows rose. Did you indeed? He moved toward the corridor as if he might escape that look. Where is she now? At the cottage. And do not go there. The housekeeper will faint. The neighbours will gossip. And if you must insist on saving every stray creature of the county, at least do it without bringing them into my parlour. Adrian paused, turning back. She is not a stray creature. Lady Cressida's expression softened, only a fraction, as if she had glimpsed something in him she had not expected. Then it hardened again. She is unsuitable, she said firmly, and if you are wise, you will keep your distance. Adrian felt the old familiar pressure of expectation, the unseen hands that guided men of his rank into approved choices. He had obeyed those hands all his life, believing duty and honour were the same. But honour, he remembered suddenly, had looked like Hannah Brooke, kneeling in the snow, speaking softly to a frightened girl. I will decide what is wise, he said quietly, and walked away before Lady Cressida could answer. He found Mrs. Finch in the back corridor, bustling with linen. She was the estate's housekeeper, practical and loyal, and possessed of an iron backbone beneath her apron. My lord. Welcome home. Mrs. Finch, Adrian said, tell me about Miss Brooke. Mrs. Finch's eyes brightened in that knowing way of older women who had watched younger men stumble into feelings and pretended surprise. She's a good girl, Mrs. Finch said without hesitation. Steady, kind, works harder than anyone I've seen, and never asks for praise. She came to help my sister, Mrs. Welling, when her health failed, and she stayed. But when my sister died last month, there was no place left for Miss Brooke, no family that would claim her. And her circumstances? Adrian asked. Mrs. Finch pursed her lips. Respectable, as far as I know. Her father was a clergyman, they said. Died when she was small. Her mother followed not long after. She was raised by distant relations who did not care much for her. She's had to make her own way. Why does Lady Cressida call her unsuitable? Adrian asked. Mrs. Finch sighed, lowering her voice. Because she has no fortune, no name that matters, and because there's talk. What talk? Mrs. Finch hesitated. They say her mother wasn't married properly, or that she was, well, connected to someone above her station, the sort of nonsense people use to excuse cruelty. Adrian's jaw tightened. He remembered Hannah's shoulders tightening when she heard the name Ravensford. Where is she now? He asked. At the Dower cottage, helping with little Anne Welling, my sister's niece. The child's been feverish since Christmas. Adrian did not wait. He went. The Dower cottage sat a short walk from the main house, half sheltered by bare hedgerows. Smoke rose thinly from its chimney. The path was packed by careful feet. He knocked. suddenly aware, absurdly, that he did not know what he meant to say. The door opened. Hannah stood there, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hair pinned back more loosely than propriety would demand in a drawing room. She smelled faintly of soap and broth. Her cheeks were warmer than when he had seen her at the inn, and her eyes widened as she recognized him. "My lord," she said and curtsied quickly, smoothing her apron as if it were a gown. He bowed. "Miss Brooke, I did not realize you were so near my estate." Her mouth tightened slightly. "Neither did I until I arrived. It seems the world is smaller than one hopes." It was not quite a joke. It was a warning. "I heard you were helping Mrs. Finch's family," Adrian said. "Yes, little Anne is improving, but slowly. Children are stubborn creatures." He glimpsed a small figure on the hearthrug, thin, pale, clutching a rag doll. The child watched him warily. "And you?" Hannah asked. "You reached home safely." "I did, in part because you helped save that girl at the inn." Hannah's gaze flicked away, uncomfortable with praise. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Adrian said quietly. "They would not." Hannah looked back at him then, and for a moment her composure slipped. He saw a flash of something, weariness perhaps, the exhaustion of always being the one who must do what others will not. "I am only doing what is necessary," she said softly. Adrian stepped inside, lowering his voice so as not to alarm the child. "My aunt speaks of you as if you are a danger." Hannah's shoulders stiffened. "Lady Cressida is entitled to her opinion." "She says you are unsuitable," Adrian pressed. Hannah's eyes met his, steady but guarded. "Society says many things, my lord. It is rarely kind and rarely accurate." He felt an odd impulse to contradict it, though he had no reason and no right. "I asked my servants to open my father's correspondence trunks," he said abruptly. "There may be letters, old matters, something about Brooke." Hannah went very still. The air seemed to sharpen. "What did you say?" she asked. He watched her carefully. "Brooke, the name. It appears in my memory, faintly. My father once spoke of it. I thought it coincidence. But now I wonder." Hannah's fingers tightened on the edge of her apron. "There was a promise," she said, barely above a whisper. Adrian's pulse kicked. "A promise." Hannah swallowed, as if forcing herself to continue. "My mother told me something once," she said, "on her deathbed. She said that before I was born, an agreement was made between our families, not for money, not for land, for honor." Adrian's voice lowered. "What agreement?" Hannah lifted her chin, though her eyes glimmered with old pain. "That the Earl of Ravensford would one day—" She paused, as if the words burned. "Would one day marry me." Silence filled the cottage, broken only by the crackle of the hearth. The child on the rug stared between them, sensing tension she could not name. "That is impossible," Adrian said finally, though he did not mean it cruelly. "My father—" "He made the promise," Hannah said quietly. "Or perhaps your grandfather. I do not know which. Only that it was spoken and meant. My mother kept proof." "Proof?" Adrian repeated. Hannah hesitated, then moved to a small wooden box on the mantel. She opened it with careful hands and withdrew a folded scrap of silk, worn soft with age. Inside lay a signet ring, heavy gold, engraved with the Ravensford crest. Adrian stared. He knew that ring. He had seen sketches of it in old ledgers. It had belonged to his grandfather, lost for decades. Hannah held it out as if it were both treasure and burden. "My mother said it was given as a pledge," she whispered. "Half of a promise. The other half was a letter. We have searched for it for years, but it vanished after my mother died. I thought—" I thought perhaps it had been nothing but a story to comfort herself. Adrian's throat tightened. He reached out slowly, not touching the ring yet, as if afraid it might vanish too. "This is Ravensford's crest," he murmured. "How did your family come by it?" Hannah's eyes shone. "By saving yours, perhaps. That is what my mother said, that a Brooke once saved a Ravensford, at risk of his own life, and the promise was made in gratitude." Adrian's mind raced. His grandfather had fought in his youth. There had been a scandal once whispered about a duel, a rescue, a debt of honor. He swallowed hard. "If this is true," he said, "why was nothing said? Why did you not come forward before now?" Hannah's expression twisted, half pride, half grief. "Because I was raised in obscurity," she said, "because I had no means to press my claim, because even if I had marched to your door with this ring, your aunt would have laughed me into the snow." Adrian flinched, because she was right. "And because," Hannah added softly, "I did not want to force myself upon anyone. I wanted the promise to be, if it was kept, kept with honor, not coercion." Adrian stared at the ring in her palm. A promise made years earlier, binding him to a woman's society deemed unsuitable. Duty surged up in him, familiar as breath. "Honor," his father's voice seemed to whisper. "Keep your word." But along with duty came something else, something startlingly human. He looked at Hannah Brooke, at her steady gaze, her tired courage, her quiet refusal to beg. And for the first time, the thought of being bound did not feel like a chain. It felt like a door. Chapter 3. The Weight of Truth. Adrian did not sleep well that night. He lay in the great bedchamber that had belonged to earls for generations, staring at the canopy as if it might answer him. The ring sat on his desk, catching lamplight with a dull, ancient gleam. He told himself he must approach this rationally. There were facts to uncover, documents to verify. It was possible, though the ring made it unlikely, that Hannah had been deceived by some family myth. It was possible someone had placed the ring in her possession to manipulate her, but every instinct he had told him Hannah Brooke was not a schemer. She did not look at opportunity the way schemers did. She did not look hungry for advancement. If anything, she looked tired of being misunderstood. Still, honor demanded more than feeling. It demanded truth. By morning, the trunks from his father's study had been hauled into the library. Dust rose in faint clouds as they were opened. Old letters, tied with ribbon, lay stacked like forgotten bones. Adrian dismissed the footman and worked alone, sleeves rolled back, sorting through years of ink and paper. He read until his eyes stung, until his fingers were smudged with dust and old sealing wax. He found correspondence about estate repairs, London politics, debts paid, and favours owed. He found a letter from his mother, written in a hand softer than his memory, urging him, then a boy, to be kind, even when kindness was inconvenient. And then, near the bottom of the second trunk, wrapped in oilcloth, he found a packet sealed with wax stamped with the Ravensford crest. His breath caught. The seal was broken already, as if someone long ago had opened it and then put it away again. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age. Adrian unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was his father's. "To my son, Adrian. If you read this, then I have failed to speak of a matter I ought to have settled while I still drew breath. For that I ask your forgiveness." Adrian's throat tightened. "There is a promise upon the Ravensford name. It was made by your grandfather, in the aftermath of a winter storm and a foolish act that nearly cost him his life. He was saved by a man named Thomas Brooke, a clergyman of no fortune but considerable honor. In gratitude, perhaps in pride, your grandfather pledged that the Brooke line would never be cast aside. He promised that should Thomas Brooke have a daughter and should Ravensford have a son, they would one day be joined in marriage to bind gratitude into family. Adrian's hands trembled slightly. I believed, in my youth, that such a promise could be honoured in other ways. I offered money. Thomas refused. He asked only that the word be kept or released honourably. Then he died. His wife wrote once, years later, to remind me of the pledge. I did not answer, not from cruelty, but from fear. Fear of what the ton would do to you, fear of binding you to a life you had not chosen. I intended to speak to you when you were older. I delayed. And then my illness took me faster than I expected. Adrian closed his eyes, anger and sorrow surging together. If Hannah Brooke lives, and if she comes with the ring your grandfather gave as pledge, then you must do what I did not. Meet her with honesty. You are not required to marry her without affection, but you are required to treat her as a gentlewoman worthy of respect. If you cannot keep the promise, then release her, openly, with generosity, so she is not ruined by whispers. The letter ended with his father's signature, a flourish Adrian had not seen since childhood. Adrian sat back, the world oddly silent around him. It was true. The promise was ink and wax and regret, and now it lay in his hands like a judgment. He thought of Hannah's face when she spoke of refusing coercion. He thought of her living in a cottage on the edge of his estate, labelled unsuitable by people who had never lifted a finger for anyone beyond their own comfort. He thought of London, of Lady Arabella Sutterby, beautiful, clever, unquestionably suitable, whose mother had been circling him for 2 seasons like a hawk. The match would be applauded. It would be easy in all the ways that mattered to society, and difficult in all the ways that mattered to a man's soul. Adrian folded the letter slowly. He did not yet know what he would do, but he knew what he would not do. He would not hide. That afternoon, he went to the Dower cottage again. Hannah was by the window, mending a child's dress. Little Anne lay on the settee, cheeks flushed but calmer, dozing with her doll. Hannah rose as Adrian entered, posture careful. "My lord," she said. "Is something wrong?" Adrian held out the letter. "I found this." Hannah did not take it at once. Her eyes scanned his face, searching, as if she could read the truth there without ink. "You believe me," she said softly. "I do," Adrian replied. "And I owe you an apology." Hannah's mouth tightened. "For what?" "For the years you spent in uncertainty, for my father's silence, for the cruelty of a promise that made you wait without assurance it would be honoured." Hannah's eyes brightened. She looked away quickly, blinking. "It was not your cruelty," she whispered. "No," Adrian said, "but it is my responsibility now." He lowered his voice, glancing at the sleeping child. "My father wrote that I must meet you with honesty, so here it is. The promise exists. It binds the Ravensford name." Hannah's fingers clenched. "And it binds you?" Adrian took a breath. "It binds my duty, but it cannot bind my heart by force." Hannah's gaze sharpened, and Adrian realized he had wounded her by accident. "I asked my father's letter the same question you did," he said quickly. "What does honour demand? But I have also learned something since meeting you. Honour is not merely obedience to the past, it is how one treats another person in the present." Hannah's face softened a fraction. "What do you want?" Adrian asked, blunt because he was afraid of softness. "Not what you think you ought to want. What you truly want." Hannah's breath caught, as if no one had offered her that liberty before. "I want," she said slowly, "to be treated as a person, not as a stain, not as a tool to polish someone else's conscience." Adrian nodded, feeling something settle inside him. "Then come to Ravensford House," he said. Hannah stiffened. Your aunt will survive, Adrian replied, almost grim. You will not remain hidden in a cottage while rumours rot your name. If the promise is to be discussed, it will be discussed openly, with you seated at my table as my guest. Hannah hesitated. Little Anne stirred, murmuring. Hannah's gaze softened as she looked down at the child. I cannot abandon her, Hannah said. You will not, Adrian replied. Anne may come too. A better room, better care. Mrs. Finch will see to it. Hannah's shoulders sagged slightly, as if the offer eased a weight she had carried too long. And after that? She asked quietly. Adrian's throat tightened. After that, he said, we will decide what honour looks like when it is lived, not merely spoken. So Hannah Brooke came to Ravensford House. It was not a grand entrance. There were no trumpets, no announcement to the county. Only Mrs. Finch bustling, servants carrying modest trunks, and Lady Cressida standing in the hall like a judge at trial. Lady Cressida's eyes narrowed as Hannah curtsied. So, Lady Cressida said, voice clipped, this is the young lady. Hannah's chin lifted. Yes, my lady. Lady Cressida's gaze flicked to Adrian, sharp as a needle. Nephew. Aunt, Adrian returned calmly. Miss Brooke is my guest. Lady Cressida's nostrils flared. On what grounds? Adrian produced the copied letter. On grounds of family honour. Lady Cressida read, her face tightening as each line landed. When she finished, she looked up slowly. This, she said, voice low, is madness. This, Adrian replied, is truth. Lady Cressida's gaze shifted to Hannah, searching for weakness. Hannah did not flinch. You have brought a storm into my house, Lady Cressida said coldly. Hannah's voice was quiet. I did not seek it, my lady. It found me. Something flickered in Lady Cressida's expression, perhaps reluctant respect. Then it vanished, replaced by rigid control. Very well, Lady Cressida said. You may stay, but understand this. Society will devour you. Hannah's mouth curved faintly. Then I shall learn to survive teeth. Adrian felt, absurdly, a surge of pride. Days passed, and Hannah moved through Ravensford House like someone determined not to disturb what she did not own. She spoke softly to servants. She helped Mrs. Finch with Anne. She did not attempt to charm Lady Cressida. She did not attempt to corner Adrian into declarations. Instead, she listened. And Adrian found himself, against all expectation, talking. He talked to her about the estate's troubles, about the tenants' accounts. Hannah asked questions that showed she understood more than she ought to, given her circumstances. She listened without flattery, without needless awe. One evening, Adrian sat with her at the library table, the steward's books spread open. Candlelight warmed the room. These figures do not align, Hannah said, tapping a column. The rent recorded here is higher than what Mrs. Finch told me the tenants pay. Adrian frowned. You spoke to the tenants? Hannah looked up, unembarrassed. They speak to anyone who will listen. They are frightened, my lord. They believe the estate will raise rents again, and they will lose their cottages. Adrian's jaw tightened. I have raised rents only once, and it was necessary. Hannah's gaze held his. Necessary to whom? The question was not accusation, it was truth. Adrian exhaled slowly, to keep the estate from debt. Hannah nodded. Then perhaps the debt is not in the rents, but in the steward. The words landed like a match. Over the next week, with Hannah's quiet assistance, Adrian uncovered irregularities that made his blood run cold. Funds missing, repairs completed that had never begun. Money meant for widows diverted elsewhere. His steward, Mr. Harrow, smiled through it all, oily and pleasant, insisting it was confusion. Until Adrian cornered him with proof. Harrow's face went pale, then hard. "You'll ruin me," Harrow hissed, "after all I've done." "You have done nothing but steal," Adrian said coldly. Harrow's eyes flicked toward the doorway, and Adrian realized suddenly that Harrow was not the only danger. Men who stole from estates often did not go quietly. They threatened. They spread scandal. They dragged others down with them. Later that night, Adrian found Hannah in the morning room, standing by the window, staring out at the snow-lit grounds. "You were right," Adrian said quietly. Hannah did not turn. Truth is often inconvenient. He moved beside her, leaving a proper distance. "If you had not been here, if you had not looked at the accounts..." Hannah's voice was soft. "If I had not been here, you would still have been an honorable man. Just an honorable man being robbed." Adrian almost smiled, then sobered. "You have saved more than money," he said. "You have saved my people." Hannah's shoulders lifted in a small breath. "And yet," Adrian added, voice tightening, "society will call you a schemer for it." Hannah turned then, her eyes dark with exhaustion and something fiercer. "Let them," she whispered. "They will call me what they please regardless. But you..." She hesitated. "You have a choice, my lord. They will call you foolish if you keep the promise, weak if you do not. They will never be satisfied." Adrian looked at her, his chest aching. "What do you call me?" he asked quietly. Hannah's breath caught. For a moment she looked as if she might retreat behind politeness. Then she said softly, "A man trying not to be cruel." The words settled in him like a vow. Chapter 4. The Promise Chosen. The county learned of Hannah Brooke's presence at Ravensford House the way counties learn everything, through servants, through glances at church, through the polite cruelty of whispered, "Have you heard?" By the second Sunday, the pews held more attention than prayer. Adrian arrived with Lady Cressida on one side and Hannah on the other, and he could feel the village's collective shock like heat. Hannah wore a simple blue gown, modest and well-made. Her bonnet framed her face without trying to disguise it. She walked with quiet steadiness, as though she had decided that if she must be stared at, she would not cower beneath it. Lady Cressida's posture was rigid with fury, at the world, at her nephew, at the indignity of being seen with scandal. But Hannah did not tremble. When the service ended, the vicar's wife approached, smile stretched too tight. "My lord," she cooed, "how kind of you to support those in need." Adrian's voice was calm, edged. "Miss Brooke is not an object of charity, Mrs. Linton. She is my guest." The woman flushed. Of course. Outside the church, a polished carriage rolled up, sleek, unmistakably London. A woman stepped down wrapped in furs, her curls arranged to perfection. Lady Arabella Sutterby. Adrian's stomach tightened. He had not expected her here. Not now. Arabella approached with effortless grace, her gaze sweeping over Lady Cressida, then pausing, slowly, on Hannah. "Lord Ravensford," Arabella said sweetly. "What a surprise. Aunt Cressida, how delightful to find you in the country." Lady Cressida's face lit with forced relief. "Arabella, what brings you—" "My mother thought it wise I should visit," Arabella replied lightly. "After all, it has been so long since Lord Ravensford has shown himself in town. One begins to worry he has forgotten his friends." Her gaze returned to Hannah. "And you must be—" Hannah curtsied, perfectly correct. "Miss Hannah Brooke." Arabella's smile widened. "Ah." The single syllable carried more disdain than a paragraph. Arabella stepped a fraction closer to Adrian, voice lowered as if confiding. "How charming. A little country project." Adrian's voice cooled. Miss Brooke is not a project. Arabella's lashes fluttered. No? Then what is she? Adrian felt Hannah's stillness beside him, felt the way she held herself, refusing to become either weapon or victim. He realized suddenly that she had been living like this her entire life, enduring the judgments of those who assumed they were entitled to decide her worth. He was done enduring with her. She is, Adrian said clearly, a woman owed respect. Arabella's smile froze. Lady Arabella, Adrian continued, I will speak with you later. For now, you will excuse us. Arabella's expression softened into a smile that promised future trouble. Of course, I would never intrude. But as she turned away, her gaze slid over Hannah once more, calculating. That evening, a letter arrived. Not from Arabella, from Mr. Harrow. It was brief, spiteful, and devastating. You think you can throw me out and keep your honour clean. You have no idea what you are dealing with. Ask your little Miss Brooke where she truly comes from. Ask her who her father really was. You will find your promise is built on rot. Adrian stared at the words until his vision blurred. Rage burned hot, but beneath it was dread. Not for himself, he could endure scandal, but for Hannah, who had endured it all her life. He found her in the small sitting room near Anne's chamber, reading aloud softly. Anne's fever had finally broken. Her eyelids drooped, soothed by Hannah's voice. Hannah looked up as Adrian entered, sensing the shift in him immediately. My lord? Adrian shut the door gently. Harrow has left a letter. He threatens your reputation. Hannah went very still. He threatens my birth. Adrian's jaw tightened. He claims there is a secret about your father. Hannah's fingers tightened on the book. For a moment, her composure looked like a thin glass held against a storm. Then he knows, she whispered. Adrian's pulse thudded. You do have a secret. I have a story, Hannah corrected softly. One people twist into a weapon. Adrian waited, forcing himself not to demand. He wanted her truth because he wanted her, not because he needed ammunition. Hannah rose slowly, setting the book down. My mother, she said, voice quiet, was a gentlewoman's maid in a great house. She was kind, clever, and she was noticed. Adrian's stomach clenched. She fell in love, Hannah continued, and there was no bitterness in her tone, only sorrow. Or perhaps she believed she did. The gentleman promised marriage, but when she became with child, he vanished into society, and my mother was dismissed. Adrian felt anger surge, on behalf of a woman he had never met, on behalf of Hannah standing before him now. My mother found refuge with Thomas Brooke, Hannah said, a clergyman. He was not her father. He was her friend. He offered her protection. He married her quietly, to give her respectability, knowing the world would sneer. He became my father in every way that mattered. He raised me. He taught me to read. He taught me that worth is not granted by those who hoard it. Her eyes shimmered. But society prefers bloodlines to kindness, Hannah whispered. They prefer scandal to truth. So they called me illegitimate. They called my mother fallen. They called my father a fool. Adrian's chest tightened. And Harrow knows because my distant relations enjoyed repeating it, Hannah said softly. Cruelty is entertainment to those with nothing else to do. Adrian exhaled, fierce. And you believed this made you unsuitable, he said. Hannah's mouth tightened. They believed it. I learned to live beneath their belief. Adrian stepped closer, still careful, still proper, but nearer than he had allowed himself before. Look at me, he said quietly. Hannah lifted her gaze. I do not care what Harrow writes, Adrian said, voice thick with restrained emotion. I do not care what Arabella whispers. I do not care what the county invents. Your father was the man who raised you. Your worth is in what you are, not what others claim. Hannah's breath caught, a tremor in her composure. And the promise? She whispered. Does my story rot it? Adrian's eyes held hers. The promise was made because a Brooke saved a Ravensford, he said. That is honour. That is not rot. Hannah's lips parted, as if she might speak and could not. Adrian's voice softened. But there is something else. The promise binds my name. Yet marriage should bind more than duty. It should bind choice. Hannah's eyes widened, fear and hope battling. Adrian swallowed. I cannot pretend affection arrives like lightning. Mine has come quietly, in your steadiness, in your courage, in the way you love without demanding reward. Hannah's composure broke then, not into drama, but into a quiet spill of tears she tried to hide. I am afraid, she admitted. So am I, Adrian replied. Hannah gave a broken laugh. Of what? Of failing you, Adrian said simply. Of letting society wound you while I stand helpless. Of discovering too late that my honour was only pride. Hannah's gaze held his, and in it Adrian saw something he had not dared hope for. Trust, slowly offered. You cannot protect me from every wound, Hannah whispered, but you can choose not to be the one who strikes. Adrian exhaled shakily. Then, he said, will you accept me? Hannah's lips trembled. As an honourable promise. Adrian's eyes burned. As a chosen love. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded once. Small. Decisive. Yes, Hannah whispered. If you choose me, then I choose you. 2 weeks later, the county received its answer. Not in secret. Not in apology. But openly, with the strength of a man finally understanding that honour was not a cage. It was a foundation. Adrian announced his engagement at a modest gathering in Ravensford's drawing room, with Lady Cressida standing stiff as a statue and Arabella Sutterby smiling like a knife. When murmurs began, Adrian lifted his hand. I am aware, he said clearly, that some will consider Miss Brooke unsuitable. I am aware that whispers will follow her, and by extension me. Let them. The room stilled. My grandfather made a promise, Adrian continued, and my father regretted delaying it. I will not delay. But understand this. I am not marrying Miss Brooke only because duty demands it. I am marrying her because she has shown me what true nobility looks like. A breath moved through the room. Shock, disdain, reluctant admiration. Hannah stood beside him, calm, chin lifted, hands steady. And if any of you, Adrian added, voice sharpening, cannot show her respect under my roof, you may leave it. Arabella's smile faltered. Lady Cressida's eyes widened. Then, slowly, something like pride softened her mouth. Later, when the guests had gone, Lady Cressida approached Hannah alone. For a moment she said nothing. Then stiffly she said, You are braver than I expected. Hannah met her gaze. So are you, my lady. It is not easy to admit the world may be wrong. Lady Cressida's mouth tightened, but her eyes glimmered. Do not make a habit of being perceptive, girl. It will irritate me. Hannah's lips curved faintly. I shall do my best. Lady Cressida paused, then, almost grudgingly, took Hannah's hand. Welcome, she said quietly, to Ravensford. Hannah's eyes shone. The wedding was not grand. Adrian insisted on that, not from shame, but because he would not turn Hannah into spectacle for the same society that had tried to crush her. They married in the small church, winter giving way to the first hints of spring. Snow still lingered in shaded corners, but the air smelled faintly of thawing earth and new beginnings. Hannah wore ivory, plain and elegant. She did not look like a triumph. She looked like herself, steady, gentle, unbroken. Adrian watched her walk down the aisle and felt something fierce and tender in his chest. A promise had brought her here, but choice would keep her. That evening, when the last guest had gone and the house settled into quiet, Adrian and Hannah stood together by the library window. Outside, the grounds lay peaceful beneath moonlight, snow finally melting into soft, dark earth. Hannah leaned lightly against the window frame, her hand resting on the glass. "It feels strange," she whispered. "What does?" Adrian asked softly. "To be claimed," Hannah said. "To have a place." Adrian's throat tightened. He lifted his hand, slowly, asking permission even now, and let his fingers brush hers. "You were never meant to be forgotten," he murmured. Hannah turned her head, looking at him with that steady gaze that had changed his life. "And you," she whispered, "were never meant to hide behind duty." Adrian's mouth curved faintly. "Then perhaps we have both been rescued." Hannah's fingers curled gently around his. Outside, a breeze moved through bare branches, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed the hour, steady, certain, a promise, once forgotten. Now kept, not as a chain, but as a chosen vow. And Ravensford House, which had stood so long beneath the weight of tradition, felt for the first time like a home. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition, may your days be filled with grace and your nights with the promise of romance.